Dear Deputy Vice-Chancellor, dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and joy to welcome you all to this event, the second Scas Wittrock lecture, to be given by Professor Helga Nowotny under the title Life in the Digital Time Machine. My name is Kristina Garsten, and I am principal of the Swedish Collegium for Advanced Study, and I'm also professor of social anthropology. The Scas Wittrock lecture series is arranged annually by the Swedish Collegium for Advanced Study. And the Collegium aims to provide optimal research conditions for curiosity-driven research. Since its foundation in 1985, it strives to protect and nurture independent inquiry, collaborative and deep thinking, and to emphasize the importance of academic freedom worldwide. Our mission is to nurture the Collegium as a dynamic and open site for encounters between disciplines and between faculties, as a site where relevance is pushed not by political agendas, but by research insights. The Wittrock lecture series was instigated in 2019 in honor of the contributions of Professor Bjorn Wittrock. During his many years as principal of Scas, Bjorn Wittrock contributed immensely to the advancement of social sciences and humanities in Sweden as well as internationally, and he continues to do so. Through his research, he has contributed to advancement of the sociology of ancient, medieval, and modern societies, to global history, intellectual history, and civilizational analysis. The lecture series aims, in a modest way, to nurture this important legacy. It also aims to address complex challenges facing contemporary society, from the shifting nature of globalization, crisis in democracy, to the future of governance and human civilization. And the first Wittrock lecture was given by Professor Jürgen Kocka. I am honored and very happy to introduce this year's lecturer, Professor Helga Nowotny. Helga Nowotny is Professor Emerita of Science and Technology Studies at the ETH in Zurich. She is a founding member of the European Research Council and a former president of the ERC. She also serves as a special advisor to the Minister of Science in Austria and vice president of the Council for the Lindau Nobel Laureate Meetings, and she is a member of several scientific boards in many European countries. Looking back, she holds a PhD in sociology from Columbia University, New York, and a doctorate in jurisprudence from the University of Vienna. And she has held teaching and research positions at a long number of leading universities and institutes for advanced study. Before joining the ETH in Zurich, Professor Nowotny was professor for science and technology studies at the University of Vienna. Throughout her professional career, Helga Nowotny has been engaged in science and innovation policy matters and continues to serve as advisor at national and EU levels. She has been granted a number of academic commissions of trust and serves on many advisory boards internationally. Among others, she is a member of the Academic Senate of the Swedish Collegium for Advanced Study, and she is also a foreign member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. She has also been awarded honorary doctorates at a number of universities internationally. Among other awards, she has been given the J.D. Bernal Prize for her lifelong achievements in social studies of science. And in 2017, she was awarded the President's Medal of the British Academy for, and here I quote, her contribution to the founding and shaping of the European Research Council and positively influencing the shape of research funding and research policy in the UK and Europe, unquote. Helga Nowotny has published widely in science and technology studies and beyond, more than 300 scientific articles. Through her publications, she has contributed significantly to important debates about time and the social, and what she calls social time. She has brought to the fore the role of knowledge and the public in an age of uncertainty, and she has argued for the need to democratize expertise and make it more accessible and, in her own words, transgressive. Her most recent book in English, as far as I know, The Cunning of Uncertainty, was featured in the Financial Times on the list of the best books in 2015. And it's with great pleasure that I welcome Helga Nowotny to give the second Wittrock lecture.
Thank you so much, Christina, for this very kind and almost comprehensive introduction. I am very, very happy to stand here today because my association with Scas goes back a long time. I remember being at the castle up there in some small rooms. I think this was the first time that Scas and I met there, then following Scas through various locations until you found this wonderful home now. But I'm also very happy to be here with you this morning because I can pay a small tribute to Bjorn, this being the second Bjorn Wittrock lecture. And I want to pay tribute to Bjorn foremost as a scholar. Christina has already mentioned some of the contributions that Bjorn made to topics like the cultural crystallization in the axial age, and his long-standing collaboration with Shmuel Eisenstadt, one of the great figures in this field, Robert Bella and others. And the way how to characterize Bjorn's contribution, I would use the somewhat old-fashioned word of erudition. The knowledge that Bjorn has about topics, people, ideas, going back and covering a huge variety of locations and places and times is really amazing. So I can imagine Bjorn conversing with people in the age of the Italian Umanesimo in the 14th century. I can imagine him conversing with persons from the Enlightenment, be it in Paris or in St. Petersburg or in Edinburgh. And likewise, moving to the 20th century, to following the debate between Heidegger and Cassirer in Davos in 1929 and many other occasions. But Bjorn has also been an activist and an advocate for the social sciences and humanities at international level, always pressing to include those who seemingly are at the periphery, while undermining the center in its sometimes pretentious feeling we are the center. And now he continues this work with the Academia Europaea, and I think this is a good way to continue this fierce advocacy that he feels for the social sciences and humanities. He has also been a participant in research policy in Sweden. I remember whenever I met Bjorn way back, we were discussing the latest Swedish research bill, and Bjorn knew all about it, and I was eager to find out what is happening in Sweden that may also come or be taken up or not at European level. But most of all, Bjorn's heart and his mind were really behind the idea of an Institute of Advanced Study, an idea that needs to be filled with life that is different in different occasions, And Bjorn knew and kept in contact with the mother of them all, Princeton, the Institute of Advanced Study, the WICO in Berlin, many others, and trying to relive this spirit of being an open space for new ideas to be generated by people coming together, by productive minds to feel. So, and institutes of advanced study are not only places for people to write their books, they're also places for young people to participate in the evolution of what keeps science together, namely to strike out for new ideas, to be brave and courageous, even if these ideas are not mainstream. So Bjorn, my personal thanks for everything you have done over the many years to make this place, but also the idea of institutes of advanced study as productive and as creative as we need them now. So let me now turn to the topic of today's Bjorn Wittrock lecture. Why did I choose this title, Life in the Digital Time Machine? Well, I feel we are sitting in a time machine, not the one that you may think of now from science fiction, where you sit in a capsule and you are pushed forward by some unkind technology and you wake up in a different time in the future. But we find ourselves in a time machine that is pushing us forward towards the future. It's a machine in the sense that we don't know who is actually in control of it. We who live in this time machine, or who is steering it, who sets the course, we are not sure about it. But there is a time machine that is pushing us forward. It is digital. And digital means it's somewhat abstract, it's somewhat mysterious, part of a black box in which strange things happen, like algorithms, and we will speak a little bit about predictive algorithms. So this is the digital part. And of course it is connected to the machine because part of the driving forces of this time machine are driven by algorithms. And then there is life outside and inside this digital time machine. Outside and inside, if you compare the digital with what? With living organisms, with our brains. Our brains function both in a digital mode and in an analog mode. Our neurons fire in a digital way, but at the same time, as a living organism, we are not only digital. And life means also we find ourselves on a planet, the only place that is inhabited for, I think, some time to come, with 7.7 billion people and more to be born and having to be fed on this earth. But it's also a planet and life shared with other living organisms, and it's the planet Earth. And this is why I want to start. It works. It works again with the unprecedented challenges that we face in life on this planet Earth we have. And here you see the 17 Sustainability Development Goals, familiar to all of you here in the room because they are on the policy agendas, not only of the UN that has put it together, they are increasingly on the policy agenda of universities that are challenged also. What is it that universities can contribute to them? And here you see them in a neatly arranged way. But in reality, it's a very messy combination that we face here. It's a complex and messy reality. And putting it out in this way in sort of glances a bit over the connectivity between these goals, the counter forces that are there against the kind of action that is required by the Sustainability Development Goals, and the messiness that comes from being connected. And one of these messy situations we are all familiar with, because every day we see something new of this kind, the people versus the elites, the kind of worries that permeate the present. What will come next? It's not only the coronavirus that may turn into a pandemic. We are not quite sure, but there are many signs very recently that it may well become a pandemic. It's the worries, what will come next? And this touches upon the way how liberal democracies are being threatened. It touches upon the lure of the Leviathan. You remember this automaton going back to Thomas Hobbes. And there are many people who think, well, it would actually be much easier if we use artificial intelligence instead of this old-fashioned way of voting. And you have artificial intelligence to decide on the outcome of the election, taking into account everything, preferences and representativeness, etc. So why do we need this kind of mechanism? So these are some of the concerns that people have and that belong to the life that we live. So what is there to counteract some of these forces? On the side of the European Union, you have all heard about it. It's the Green Deal that is being promoted, not just at EU level, where the very ambitious goal is to have no net emissions anymore from green gases by the year 2050. Now, this is a very short period of time, and to have no net emissions is a very ambitious goal. Also, under the Green Deal, the idea is to decouple economic growth. That still will be necessary, but to decouple it from resource use. In other places, you hear talks about green technologies as the next launching pads for the next wave of innovations. Or you hear even about green capitalism, whatever you want to understand by these two words. And the question behind these ongoing discussions and debates, how to stem the tide of unrest, of anger, of resentment, somehow boils down for me to the question, can we still uphold the narrative of progress that has been so much part of our history from the Enlightenment onwards, shaping modernity throughout, the belief in progress, but also the very powerful narrative of progress? Tomorrow will be better. And it will be better for the next generation, and we now have empirical survey data where about half of the population are convinced their children will not be better off than what they are now. And these are not the most excluded that are not even included in these surveys. These are the middle classes. And so we may also have to face the question, has the narrative of progress not so much failed us, but has it come to an end? And is there a need for another narrative? Now, let me take you back a little bit in time, not so far, but to the last century at least, the middle of the last century, 1955, and to a person, the author was a small article that appeared in a technological review with the title, Can We Survive Technology? And the author, John von Neumann, a polymath, major figure in the history of how modern computers came to be, because he was working in the 1940s at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton. And so how does this person come to pose the question? he is a foremost proponent of technologies. He was at the forefront of technological development. And now he comes up with this question, can we survive technology? What he meant by it was the dominant technology of the time, namely nuclear weapons. And the question for him was really for the kind of explosiveness, namely nuclear weapons that we have created. What will happen, and by 1980, he thought in 1955, we will have even more powerful explosive nuclear weapons around. The globe is dangerously small. Its political units dangerously unstable. And in the article, he goes on to describe what I call the discovery of finiteness on the planet. And he says, we have only this planet, and with this explosiveness of nuclear weapons, we have to come to terms somehow. How are we going to cope with what we have created? Now, there's always something to be said about the irony of history, and I think history is full of such ironic points that you can make with the benefit of hindsight. Here is a person who was really at the forefront of the development of what we today call artificial intelligence, digitalization, and he does not even mention this technology as something that has to do with the question he poses: what will our relationship with technology be like in the future? So, because he was exclusively focused on nuclear weapons. And today, luckily, this threat has somehow been pushed into the background. It's still there. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists keep reminding us every year when they have their update. It's still there, but in the public mind, it has been overtaken by this other technological development, namely of digital technologies. And what people worry about is surveillance. Are we moving towards a situation that even trumps what 1984 was describing, the nightmares of total surveillance? Or will we head towards the singularity that Ray Kurzweil describes, where machines take over? So these are the concerns that people feel they have today. And so we can ask, have we peaked? This is an old question. It has been always posed with regard to oil. The oil peak has always been postponed. Now there is enough fossil oil around still for years and decades to come. It's just a question of cost and technological equipment to extract it from places where it was not cost effective before. But the question behind it is really, are we moving towards a tipping point? If we are not reducing our fossil fuel consumption, if we are not doing enough against climate change, are we moving towards a tipping point where collapse is possible? And all this just means that something that at least the social scientists and humanists and many other people have known all along, technology alone will not save us. Technology provides many beneficial solutions, but it's never the only solution on which we can rely. It depends on how we use it. It depends on many other social, economic circumstances, how we embed technology, how we use it, who controls it, whether we can actually benefit from the solutions it provides. And so we have arrived at something that is called the Anthropocene. When Paul Crutzen, who, by the way, was an early member of the Scientific Council of the European Research Council, Paul Crutzen, who devised this term that has been taken up very, very quickly, it meant the acknowledgement that human activities, in fact, have shaped the planet. Our activities have shaped the Earth system in a way that is irreversible. and that obliges us to take some new role vis-a-vis the environment, to become stewards of nature and what is left of the natural environment. But the Anthropocene does more. It's in a way, it's a symbolic declaration. And the International Union of Geological Sciences, the geologists are the official scientific timekeepers, in the sense that it is they who decide on the beginning and end of the age of the Earth. There are epochs, there are eras, there are all kinds of sequences. You may remember some of them from your high school. Impossible to remember, but you know there was a Cambrian and so on. And this is now under discussion in a working group that has been set up on the Anthropocene, and people in the working group are discussing, can we find traces, physical traces, in the rocks or sediments of lakes that provide what is called the golden spike, that indeed human activities have left traces in the rocks. Now, the most probable candidate are the early tests of atomic bombs in the 1940s, where radioactivity traces can still be found in the rocks, so this would satisfy these criteria. Other people argue for other beginnings. But above all, the Anthropocene means we are confronted with different timescales. To say we are beginning a new epoch which is human-made means our human timescales that are short-term, that are spanning few generations. Historians can go back a bit longer, but in terms of living memory, we are confronted now with these enormous timescales that are really the age of our Earth. And taking such a longer time perspective and linking up to what I just said before about John von Neumann, it's interesting to see that there is a convergence around that time. So in the 1940s, the development of the atomic bomb, and later, of course, the weapons. In the Institute of Advanced Princeton, the development starting with Alan Turing, his famous paper from 1936 that changed the way how time is conceived, and I will say a few words about it very, very soon. And in the 1950s, we have what is called the Great Acceleration. And the Great Acceleration means that looking at human activities, economic growth and other activities, extraction of minerals, there's a huge array of indicators of human activities and a very strong correlation with changes in the Earth system, emissions of greenhouse gases, loss of biodiversity, etc. This is called the Great Acceleration. It comes together for the first time in the 1950s and has been going on since. And people here in the Stockholm Institute of Environmental Sciences are keeping in touch and updating these indicators. So you have this coming together in this period around the middle of the last century of the beginnings of the computational revolution, of the weapons that we have created, but also how, what is behind the Anthropocene, how human activities and the changes in the Earth system go in a kind of synchronicity. And this means we are in the process of a niche building. This is a view of the Earth, the inner Earth, and we live just on this tiny crust outside, not everywhere, because the oceans need a lot of space. So this is our habitat, and this is all we have. And niche building is something that living organisms have been doing all the time. Worms do it, octopuses do it, and we have been doing it previously. We have built our niches with the early phases of agriculture, early deforestation, etc. We have built the industrial niche, and now I think we are in the process of building our digital niche, because whatever we do, we will have to do it with digital technologies that we must use in order to be able to manage the uncertainty of living in this tiny crust that is at our disposition. And each of these niche building activities also has a different temporal regime. The industrial age, as you know, the industrial niche and the industrial age was dominated by what we call linear time, the time of clock time that regulated the production processes, working life, the way how the military was run, how railways were run. All this followed a certain temporal regime that was linear, precise, sequential, but strictly regulated. And I remember when the first digital watches came up, where you no longer saw the slowly moving finger on a disc that represented the clock time that was shown, but you saw just figures jumping. People wondered, will this change our experience of time? The answer was inconclusive. But I think the real changes have to do with the way how we rearrange what we call the past, the present, and the future. And to come back to what to digital time, it's not just the jumping numbers. What happened way back when Alan Turing devised what later became to be known the Turing universal Turing machine, which is not a real machine, it's a mathematical construct. Alan Turing made the big difference. Before him, numbers were used to do things. We were calculating, we were measuring. The purpose was to help us in setting up machinery, in doing things. But since Alan Turing's universal machine, it's now numbers that can do things. Numbers do things. Algorithms do things. They are performative. And time is no longer this relationship between two continua. It can be stopped, it can be restarted, it can be arranged sequentially. So we have a digital time and we have our living time. And what is interesting is that how are these temporal bearings that we have, how are they shifting? And what we call the past, present, and future has always had some blurred boundaries, but previous generations have thought of them in different ways. The past is the past, and as living beings, we realize the past is the time gone. We realize we live in the present because we have the biological era of time inscribed in us. We know we move from birth to death, like all living organisms. And there is something, the future. But for previous generations, the future was something that was kept apart. It was paradise, or it was hell, or it was something that was different and sharply demarcated from the present. And the past was partly seen as dangerous because the ancestors and the ghosts that were no longer among the living were pushed to the past, but they wanted to come back. So you had all kinds of tales and myths how to relate the present with the past. And I think now we live in a present that we cannot escape, we cannot go back to the past, but we feel very much this pressure of the present becoming intensified, in becoming compressed. Acceleration belongs to modernity. This was the predominant feeling, things become faster and faster. By now, you have reached speeds, what computers do, it's unimaginable for us. We cannot even think that we can ever compete with this speed. So acceleration still continues, but in my view, the predominant subjective feeling of time is of time becoming compressed into this present. And we also want to put more and more into the 24 hours that we have. And this leads to this feeling of both emotional, digital overburdening or informational, digital overburdening, where, we have only this present and it gets fuller and fuller. And the question that is of interest here is, how open will the future remain? And again, I come back to this a bit later. But let's look at what happens in our relationship with the past. Now, due to the fantastic opportunities that science and technology have put at our disposal, we can go back and we can look way, way back into the deep past of the universe. The Ligo Detector that got the Nobel Prize a few years ago was the work that took 50 years to build the equipment of the detector, and teams of scientists, generations succeeding each other, going back to a prediction that Einstein had made more than 100 years ago. And we see these pictures, we see fossils, etc. So the past is brought into the present. And when we see these pictures, we have the feeling, not this happened 1,300,000,000 years ago. We have the feeling it's happening now. We are part of the universe. We have these ways of looking, even if the images are, of course, artificial images. We cannot see them. We receive signals that are transformed into visual images. But we have the feeling we can see them. This is part. And so this is the way how the past comes into the present. But it also is, of course, part of human history, being brought more and more into the present. And here, while nobody is really concerned in our daily lives whether the gravitational waves arrive a bit earlier or later, or even whether they exist at all, it does not touch us in our daily lives. But it touches us. What are the historical records? How do they relate to national identities, to personal identities? How do we interpret different ways what happened in history? The history, as we know, is written by the victors and not those who were defeated. So you always have these counter histories that are sometimes passed on in families that conflict with the official accounts, etc. All this is also part of it, and this is even more so for the history of human evolution that is being rewritten on an almost daily basis by paleogenomics, due to new methods that we now have in sequential in DNA sequencing. It is possible to retrace the lineage of human beings, different lineages. And it turns out our history is a huge history of migration, of conquest, of assimilation, of moving around. And David Reich, one of the researchers at the forefront of this enormous global effort, he tells a story about India. He had set up a collaboration with Indian colleagues about this enormous diversity, genetic diversity that you find in India. And their hypothesis was that the Indian continent was really populated by two different streams, one coming from the northwest and the other one coming from the southeast. That also, as often happens, a correlation between genetic traces and linguistics traces that are also divided by language. And so they were very happy to find a collaborative group, Indian colleagues, who also had data. And then at one meeting, they had to put everything together. The Indian colleagues said, sorry, we will have to quit this project. So what went wrong? We have all the data. We can show what we are saying. Well, it turned out the Indian colleagues were afraid that this would be politically explosive, to show that part of India, a large part of India, was really migrated in by people coming from outside, from the northwest, from Euro-Asians, and the other part coming from the south, you did not quite know from where, etc. So they were really afraid that this was politically too explosive. The problem was solved by language that always can be helpful. So now one stream of migration is called the northern ancestral stream, and the other the southern ancestral stream, and the study could continue. So just one little anecdote about this controversial field, that how the recent past enters the present, that can cause these kind of conflicts. Let's look at another interesting study here, because it's an example of how digital means are using to make part of the past available, part of human history available to scholars in the humanities and in the social sciences that did not exist before. There's a huge database called Sheshat, collecting whatever data you can find. It's part of a movement that is called cliodynamics, so the historical dynamics. But it just here, and it allows you to answer questions that humanists and historians have been debating before for decades. Namely, did moralizing and punishing gods precede the certain complexity of societies, or did they come afterwards? And you have theories arguing for one and for the other. And here this group of quantitative historians said, well, let's look at the data. We have proxy indicators for a complexity of society, the rise of empires, certain complexity, urban clustering, even if based on agriculture, etc., etc. And we also have indicators for when these moralizing and punishing gods first emerged. And it turns out, according to them, that the moralizing gods came, they came after complex societies were established. In other words, they were instruments used by the hierarchical powers established in complex societies to control the behavior in these societies. This is a preliminary conclusion, but I wanted to bring it in here because it allows you to test new hypotheses. And this also goes back to something I said before about Bjorn, the openness that is needed by people working in the social sciences, in the humanities, to be open and to see, well, now we have new methods that allow us to test ideas that we have had. Now, let's move on to the future. it's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. This is a famous quote by William Gibson, the Canadian science fiction writer. And Gibson lately became somewhat, I would not say he distanced himself about it, but he said, what I notice now is a kind of future fatigue. In the last century, 20th century, that covered most of his life, people were speaking enthusiastically about the 21st century. Now I hear no one speaking about the 22nd century, let alone with enthusiasm. So some kind of future fatigue, because the future is now. And this is not only my version of it. I was very felt confirmed when I discovered that this is the official report written by a group of scientists for the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals report, which has precisely this title, The Future is Now. And sustainability makes it last for the future, but we have to do something now. And this again adds to this compression of time that we feel and the complexity of the present. Now, let me move to the predictive power of algorithm, which is really at the heart of the matter of what I'm talking about. What we call digitalization did not arise from nowhere. It's not just going back and saying Alan Turing started it, John von Neumann did this, and then you have other generations that took it forward. Yes, this is part of the story, but what really happened and what makes it so powerful now is the convergence of three different strands. The first is the enormous amount of big data we have. And this enormous amount of big data is being amplified and added almost in a fantastic way, because we leave traces with every little use of every little device that we have at our fingertips. And it's not only the smartphones and our laptops, etc. It's also the sensors that are installed in cameras everywhere, sensors that by now are trained not just for facial recognition, but are trained to discern attention, how much attention is shown on your face or in your eyes, what are emotions, emotional arousal to certain contents, etc. So the enormous amount of data is one of the strands that contributes to this powerful instruments that we now have. The other one, of course, are algorithms. And here it's interesting that there was a kind of new second life of algorithms, if you want. The first generation of algorithm was largely based on logical reasoning that did not lead where people wanted to go. And then it was only when neural networks were made the basis that there came the big jump forward. And this is the basis for machine learning, for deep learning, etc. But the third important strand is the computational power. And whenever you look at images of what computers looked like, in the 50s, 60s, or even just 10 years ago, and you compare them with the computational power they now have, it's enormous. So it's the convergence of these three strands, that make this the powerful machine that we now have. And this goes back to what are we using it for? And we are using it for, we want to know what the future holds. We want to know what will happen next. And this, of course, is the old desire. You see here an oracle bone, Chinese origin. You find divination practices all around the world. People were using local means in an African hamlet, throwing chicken bones or whatever you have in your environment, trying to find out what does the future hold for us. This was rather sophisticated technology because people were using the shoulder blades of sheep or of turtle shells, and they had to be carefully cleaned and held above fire so that you could see the cracks that appeared, and there were specialists that were able to interpret the cracks. People now think that this also was the origin of the Chinese writing, by the way, that out of this divinatory practices, the Chinese script arose. So this, and of course, the idea behind divination is the future is known, it's just we don't know it. The future has been preset, and we can have access through such techniques and clever intermediaries to what you know. Now, we don't practice divination anymore, but we still like to write these reports. They are mainly extrapolation of the past trends. So the future is somehow constituted by what we know already, while with a divinatory practice, the future is known and we can have access to it. And there are people like Elena Esposito who makes an interesting comparison, and she says predictive algorithms are similar to divinatory practices in the sense that they address one individual and tell one individual, we know that you will have a risk in your blood pressure will lead to cancer, or you have a certain condition that you should know about, or you will do this or that. So this is acting to influence and to intervene with an individual, while the statistics of the 19th century were based on averages. They were not addressing the individual as such. You could only give certain probabilities to an individual. And with predictive algorithms, probabilities have been pushed to the background. And we read them as though probabilities do not exist. And this is part of how the digital time machine works. As a machine, it needs an infrastructure, huge infrastructure. It needs huge energy consumption, electric grids. It needs the capital to feed it. It needs startups. All this is part of what is behind the machinery. And, of course, the immense hunger for more and more data. And this is what is the basis of this predictive algorithms that we all know. Amazon knows which book you should buy or which restaurant you should go to, whom you should meet, etc. So all this comes from this. But there are different kinds of prediction machines. One is the weather machine. I'm a great admirer of weather prediction and the history of it, starting not far from here with Bjorknes in Norway in 1904. And here we are at a point where we can follow live the advancement of a hurricane or a storm. So it's a prediction machine that allows us to follow. But it's a different kind of prediction machine. Then you have prediction machines like the book by Barabashi, a network scientist. He can predict he has the formula that tells you, and academics may be interested in this, it tells you what are your chances of success with your publications or your books. He's careful to say, success is recognition by others. And recognition by others is based, of course, on your networks. And so whether you're successful or not is, in this formula, an outcome of whom you know and the networks. And, of course, there is the performance the real performance that people do, which is not identical to the success you have. But then there are also prediction machines that make money, like this book here by 3 economists who think they have found the simple economics of AI. And as it's a simple economics, they have a simple definition for prediction, and they call it prediction is the process of filling in missing information. Prediction takes information you have, data and uses, and to generate information you don't have. And that's the formula for the simple economics of AI. This is taken from their book. So you move upward, you have the costs for prediction are sinking, because now we have all these predictions around us. This means you no longer need the experts, like writing reports, etc., because you have all these cheap predictions, and experts are expensive. So this will increase your productivity and profit, and the value chain will be automated or semi-automated. They are also careful to say, well, human judgment is still important, but if you look at this pyramid that they have, this pyramid, now I made mistakes. No, never mind. So let me move on. This is another prediction machine. And it's interesting because it's an example of how predictive algorithms are also moving into artistic and creative pursuit. Now, to use an algorithm in music making was already known by Mozart and practiced by Mozart. But to be able to finish a symphony, we have unfinished symphonies that other composers have managed to fill in somehow. But these were people, and now the claim is we don't need these experts anymore. We have algorithms to do it, just as the simple economics of AI was arguing. And we used an algorithm to let us know what is the next painting that Rembrandt would have painted had he lived on. This is the advertisement. It was a huge publicity exercise in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And if you just focus on the rest, it was led by the firm Walter Thompson, Amsterdam, with the help of Microsoft, and for the client ING. Took them 1.5 years. How to teach a machine to think, act, and paint like Rembrandt. So this was the goal set by this exercise. So what did they do? Rembrandt, as you know, made many, many portraits. He was famous, amongst other, for the exquisite sensitivity he had for portraying the features of the persons who were sitting for them. So they selected out of this huge treasure of portraits, they selected some, and among the some, you also find this picture, which is a bit strange. This is the famous anatomical theater of Dr. Tulpian, and the people who you see here, their features, these were doctors who paid Rembrandt to be on this picture. So these are hardly the normal portraits, but nevertheless they are also portraits. So the next Rembrandt project took all this, and the technical sophistication is mind-blowing. How they compare the noses, the eyes, the width of the mouth, the creaks in the cheeks, etc., etc. It's really mind-blowing. And in the end, you get the result, the next Rembrandt. So what is it actually? It is an extrapolation of the averages that you find in the selected portraits for this project, But the way how it is being presented to the public is the algorithm has the power to predict what Rembrandt would have painted next. And this brings me to my last section here, the question, are we in danger of being eluded, of being in control? And how the power of prediction exists, but what makes it so powerful? Yes, the pure usage, the technical prowess, the sophistication that we have, all this makes it very powerful. But where will it lead us? And here the question comes in of self-fulfilling prophecies. This is a famous theorem in sociology going back to the year 1928 by a sociologist by the name of Thomas, and it's called the Thomas Theorem. If men define situation as real, they are real in their consequences. And this is a self-fulfilling prediction. So it's not just facts, it's the meaning people attribute, the way how they define, interpret the situation. And if they believe it is real, it will influence how they behave and what they do. And this has been shown, this effect exists in financial market, it exists with regard to in the political arena, etc., etc. And the risk is the more we are surrounded by this predictive algorithm, the more we fall into the trap of self-fulfilling prophecies. And the smaller and smaller will become the way how we conceive of our agency. We are transferring human agency to an algorithm that is able to tell us what we will do, how we will feel tomorrow. Not only the risk, but actually you will feel better tomorrow if you do this and this. And if people start to believe it, they will actually follow the diet or the mood pills or whatever the algorithm is suggesting to them, and given this self-fulfilling prophecy, you will feel better at least. And the real question for me is the return to a deterministic worldview. It has taken humanity a very, very long time to discover, and I think this is a major social invention or discovery, that the future is open, and that the future has not been preset by fate or by God or by some kind of deity that knows everything, and we just are thrown into this deterministic universe, and we can perhaps employ some rituals to ward off the worst consequences, but basically everything has been preset. And again, myths and stories are full of these tales, people trying to escape the curse or the fate that has been predicted, and starting with Oedipus or Hamlet or you name it. And yet they cannot, because they are bound by fate. And it has taken us centuries. And it has taken us approximately to what Reinhard Koselleck, the German historian, calls the Sattelzeit, the settle time, between 750 and 850. To make this major discovery, the future is open. There's an open horizon. Our lives will not resemble the lives of our parents and grandparents. It will be different. It can be different. And the gap between the experience of the past and, of course, the aspirations that people had about their future, that it could not only be different, but it could be different in the sense of better, made this open horizon possible as one way of conceiving the future. And science and technology would be impossible without this open horizon of the future, because there's the huge space of what is possible, and science is moving forward into this territory of the unknown, and what I try to describe here in the cunning of uncertainty. So we have perhaps, are we moving towards a shiny commercialized future? But even then, if the prediction machines that make money and other commercialized products are becoming the ones who tell us what our future is, and if we follow self-fulfilling prophecies, we will live in a shiny commercialized future, but it will not be of our own making. And it will become a very closed and deterministic environment. And also the opportunities are always for some and not for others, and who determines. So, and this is where I would like to end. Who would like to live in such an entirely predictable world? And if not, do we have to learn to live with probabilities and to embrace uncertainty, or what else can we do? Thank you very much.